The last thing we're going to review is really the big picture of the nervous system. And this is really the last topic that we sort of talked about on Friday, which is how the central nervous system differs from the peripheral nervous system, but how they communicate. So this would be the central nervous system. This would be the peripheral nervous system. We talked about the central nervous system on Friday. What were the components of the central nervous system? What are the components of the central nervous system? The brain and spinal cord. So brain and spinal cord. And then our peripheral nervous system are pretty much all of our peripheral nerves. Okay. Now, with regards to the direction of communication, we have afferent versus efferent flow of communication here. So let's say in our peripheral nervous system, there are sensory receptors. Right? And these pick up information about the world around us, and they relay that information to the central nervous system. What were the centers that we relay this information to? What do we call those centers? Specifically in the brain. Integrating centers, right? So integrating centers in the CNS. And then the CNS would then send messages or communication back to the effector tissue that was in the peripheral nervous system. All right, so this direction of communication is called afferent. Right, and this is really sensory. This is our perception, right? Temperature, auditory perception, visual perception, okay, pressure perception. And then the effect would be efferent signals, efferent. Okay, so communication from the sensory receptors in the peripheral nervous system up to the brain is an afferent signal, whereas communication from those integrating centers out to the effector tissue was an efferent signal. Now, there were two types of effector tissues. I'm going to talk a lot more about this in the next topic or the next chapter, which is the autonomic nervous system. So there was the autonomic effector tissue and then the somatic effector tissue. All right, now let's just mention some differences between these two. So the autonomic effector tissue had two further divisions. There was the parasympathetic. Can anyone think of the function of the parasympathetic? I know we haven't touched this, but should be a review. What were the functions of the parasympathetic system? Okay, we'll talk more about this, but this is rest and digest. There was also the sympathetic, which is fight or flight. Okay. And the name of this junction was the neuroeffector junction. On the somatic side, what was the name of this type of tissue? So this is our skeletal muscle. Right, and this is our neuromuscular junction. These are topics that we'll talk much more about. But it's important for you to see how they tie together with the overall anatomy of the nervous system. We have the central nervous system, which includes the brain and spinal cord. We have the peripheral nervous system, which includes the peripheral nerves. Okay, as a part of the peripheral nerves, we also have the receptors. the sensory receptors that are picking up information, as well as the effector tissues that are picking up those responses. We have two types of effector tissues: the autonomic effector tissues, which are cardiac muscle, glands, etc., etc., and would be skeletal muscle on the somatic side. The autonomic system is involuntary, which means we cannot control it. And then the somatic side is voluntary. All right, which means that we have control over the somatic nervous system, so the skeletal muscle. Okay, that's the general orchestration or the organization of the nervous system. And again, this is exactly where we're going to pick off for chapter 11, talking about the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system.